I could not go on talking about faith in time of war today when we have all witnessed a profound election result in the United States. So allow me to speak for the first few minutes about the Republican victory, the Democratic defeat, and what I think it means for us. Social progressives favor state support for minority groups and for traditionally minoritized people. Although we may grumble, we generally feel that all of us should pay our fair share of taxes to support the state's functions: hospitals, roads, schools, good government, adequate security. And we appreciate regulatory agencies that monitor the quality of our food, water, buildings, banking, etc. Many of us believed in the Democratic Party pillars, which are well known. I have them all written here. And many of us thought that they were the opposite of the Republican Party pillars. And in some ways, I think they are. So I was in shock for a few days after the election. My heart goes out to all the folks who worked so hard and donated so much money and time to candidates who did not win. I'm glad that they put up the fight that they did. I fear for how the leader of the party will run things, surrounded by true believers who seem likely to trample the human rights of certain workers, including the undocumented, our LGBT cousins, women who become pregnant and do not want to remain so, the environment writ large, and anyone who has spoken ill of the president during the past 4 years. Canada will be affected by many of the proposed changes. Our economy might be rocked by US tariffs. Many undocumented workers might flee to safety in our country, and I'm glad to see that Ottawa is already making plans to support the new arrivals of huddled masses yearning to breathe free. I worry that the new administration will bully Ukraine, the land of my grandfather, into accepting a deal that sells Ukraine short. I worry that Palestine will be erased. I worry that the United States will attack the civilian population of Iran. But we cannot give up our hopes. Peace, order, and good government are still Canada's watchwords. We must be extra careful, diligent, and focused when we Canadians go to the polls in 2025 to select the new federal government, knowing that the people we send to Ottawa must be wise enough to stand up to and also work with Washington. Our Member of Parliament Elizabeth May emailed her email this morning. To prepare for the next Canadian election, we will need to analyze what just happened, to craft messages to blunt the appeal of the siren song of fascism. For Canadians, we have to think about Trump's message and not be complacent. We must prepare and prevent the possibility that Canadians might be conned as well. Okay, enough about the US election. Perhaps more will come out at the forum or during coffee. Faith in time of war. In 1939, as it looked like Europe's war was going to be another big one, a 27-year-old Yukon Native man joined the Canadian Army. In order to enlist, Elijah Smith enfranchised himself. I had to look up what that means. The online Canadian Encyclopedia says, enfranchisement was the most common of legal processes by which First Nations peoples lost their indigenous status under the Indian Act. The term was used both for those who gave their status up by choice and for the much larger number of Indigenous women who lost status automatically upon marriage to non-status men. Only the former were entitled to take with them a share of band reserve lands and funds, but both groups lost their treaty and statutory rights as Indigenous peoples and their right to live in the reserve community. So in order to join the army and fight for Canada, Elijah Smith's only choice was to give up his legal identity as a First Nations person and become a full citizen. Like thousands of young men and women, Elijah Smith wanted to travel the world, to learn new things, and to do his bit. The Army trained him to operate heavy equipment and to repair trucks. He served overseas for 6 years. After the war, he returned to Yukon. Elijah told his sons, is that her again? Elijah told his sons about his positive experiences fighting alongside non-Indigenous soldiers. fighting side by side with other individuals who were not of the same race, fashioned his outlook when he came home. His son, Steve Smith, told the Aboriginal People's Television Network, "The war taught him that a German didn't decipher between a First Nations person, a French person, Italian person, or a British person. If you had the wrong uniform on, they still shot at you." But here's the crazy part. When Elijah returned to Yukon, he was dismayed to learn that he didn't qualify for the same benefits as non-Indigenous veterans, such as receiving a parcel of land or the rights to education, because he was not considered a full Canadian citizen by the federal government. Elijah Smith found it interesting that he was not really a citizen within his own homeland. He went on to become chief of the Whitehorse Indian Band, now known as the Kwanlundun First Nation. He was heavily involved in forming the Yukon Native Brotherhood, the Yukon Association of Non-Status Indians, and what is now the Council of Yukon First Nations. In 1973, he spearheaded a delegation of First Nations leaders from Yukon to Ottawa to meet Prime Minister Trudeau, the other Trudeau. It was there he presented Trudeau with a document called Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow, a policy paper that paved the way for the territory's modern land claims negotiations. 50 years later, Yukon is leading Canada in settled land claims, as 11 of the 14 First Nations in the territory have reached final agreements and are no longer governed by the Indian Act. Elijah Smith's time in the Army taught him valuable skills both in heavy equipment and in leadership, which he used for the rest of his life. As a matter of reconciliation, I want to hold up the example of Elijah Smith, a Yukon First Nations person who fought for justice as a soldier in Europe and as a chief at home. And I got to conduct the wedding of his grandson on June 22nd in the Yukon, on land that he claimed when the government told him he couldn't have land. So tomorrow is Remembrance Day. There will be parades at the Legislature lawn, at Saanich District Hall, at the Oak Bay Cenotaph, at Sydney City Hall, and in Langford. I felt proud on Friday to be part of a Remembrance Day event inside the Legislature Rotunda. Retired Unitarian Minister Francis Dearman was the Master of Ceremonies, and Christina Stevens, a member of First Unitarian, was the choir director on Friday. It felt good to be part of a Unitarian-led service of remembrance in the center of government, although we didn't put enough Unitarianism into it next year. Why do we continue doing these events? Sometimes it's clear that the purpose of remembering is to honor lives lost, their memories, sacrifices, heroism, and lost potentials. To honor is to hold in high respect. In the public sphere, such honoring is often accompanied by gratitude, sometimes by grieving, occasionally by calls to step up the legacy with which we have been gifted. Sharon Brissolara in California writes about the challenges of striving for equity, and I feel that her writing can help us to show how we think of public acts of remembrance. She writes, "In some places, the purpose of remembering is reconciliation, a committed step towards reckoning with the past together in order to heal as a community or a nation. Efforts aimed at truth and reconciliation, like the ones that have been initiated in Australia, South Africa, and Rwanda, are recognitions of what is required to work together for a better future for everyone. Ongoing dialogue, grappling with history, consideration of the ethical imperatives of current and future actions." Sharon Brissolara continues, "In this era of information silos and distrust of sources that seem to offer political views different from our own, the purpose of remembrance can also be to assert that events actually happened and that they were significant. Concerted efforts to rewrite history exist now, they have existed in the past, and they shape our efforts to remember even the recent past." Finally, Brissolara writes, "We cannot change the war's harmful actions, ideologies, practices, and policies that occurred in the past. We cannot change the fact that such things happened or our relationship to those who actively created or supported those actions, even when we find those actions abhorrent or illegal. The actions of the distant past are not ones that we as individuals had any opportunity to influence. And yet, if what happened is truly not in keeping with our understanding of who we want to be, then we are left with the decision to change the present for a better future, or to reinforce the past. The truth is, if we don't intentionally work for something different, we are complicit in holding up structures and practices that emerged from the past. We should reflect on what our remembrances of the past mean for our present and our future. What we choose to ignore or omit or revise leaves its own particular legacy and consequences. It's hard to find honor and loyalty in denying the fact of deep harm or of attempting to distance ourselves from past events. We could engage in the process of public reflection for the purpose of listening, learning, and healing together. Today there are wars in Sudan, Israel, and Ukraine. The governments of Canada and India are engaged in diplomacy to find resolution to an impasse. The new US President, Vice President believe that attacking Iran will soothe troubles in the Middle East. Tomorrow there will be new conflicts. How can we work for peace? What are we to do? Do we let the war profiteers and the politicians lead us down the path to war? And then after a few days, let the war move from the front page of the newspaper to the second page, to the third page, until the war only appears on the obituary pages? Do we all become conscientious objectors like our Quaker cousins and reject all participation in armed conflict? Do we write letters to politicians and demand that Canadian soldiers, sailors, and aviators return home and to concentrate on national defense, leaving foreign people to deal with their own conflicts? Could we demand that the Government of Canada cease all military alliances with the United States, which is involved in most of the current wars? Could Canada become a neutral country like Switzerland? I doubt that we can get out of alliances. It's probably too late to declare neutrality, and I don't think it would go along with what Canada stands for. So what can we Unitarian Universalists do? We can hope and pray, drop pebbles, but my experience with the efficacy of hope and prayer leads me to think we have to do more to get measurable results. We can sing about peace. There is data to support the worth of singing for peace. We can write letters for peace and for a rejection of militarism. Years ago, I had the pleasure and privilege of interviewing the author of A General for Peace. Leonard Johnson was a soldier with a difference, Canadian soldier with a difference. He was a general in the Canadian Armed Forces, and he was a passionate and unspoken crusader for world disarmament. Leonard Johnson had been a conventional officer, steeped in Cold War ideology, a firm believer in peace through strength. In 1980, he was appointed as Commandant of the National Defence College in Kingston. And there his views changed dramatically. They did a field trip to Colorado Springs, to NATO headquarters. And for the generals and colonels that were on this National Defence course, they said, here, we'll show you how we respond, how NORAD responds to a nuclear attack. So they watched, and warnings came in, and Soviet bombers and Soviet missiles, and then the lead general picked up the red phone, called the White House, and said, yes, it's an attack. Put down the phone, then turned to General Johnson and the others and said, there, that's it. And Johnson said, that's it? That's what NORAD exists for? Yeah, we're for warning. What about fighting back? We're not in the fighting back department. And Johnson came home and said, everything I've been taught is wrong. By the time of his retirement in 1984, he was a harsh critic of both US military policy and of the central doctrine of contemporary strategy, which was nuclear deterrence. He embraced activism, tirelessly promoting the causes of peace and security. Leo spoke against militarism and in favor of peace until his dying days. and his words and activism had a positive effect. I think that an essential Unitarian Universalist move would be to gather with others who believe in peace or who want to stop militarism. The next step might be to have a frank and open-ended discussion and education series about militarism, war, peace, and neutralism. We could invite Project Plowshares and the Quakers and the Voice of Women for Peace. We could also include history professors from UVic and perhaps the commander of the Navy base at Esquimalt. One result of such an education series might be that a group of UUs does not want to ban all wars, but might even support certain foreign military actions like peacekeeping and peacemaking. The just war theory might sway us away from the strict Quaker position, for instance. But we cannot just sit here and let others make all the decisions about war and peace. Not if we truly believe that every person has inherent worth and dignity. Tomorrow there will be new wars. What will we do? Attila has some meditation music for us.